The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 17 star systems, each one carefully managed by Empress Valeria from her crystal throne on the capital world of Nexus Prime. Her people were born blind, a genetic trait that had evolved over millions of years as they developed other enhanced senses. They could hear a whisper from across a room, smell emotions in the air, and feel vibrations through solid metal that would tell them everything they needed to know about their surroundings. But Valeria was different. She was the only Zephyrian born with sight in over 10,000 years, marking her as chosen by the gods to rule. Her golden eyes could see across vast distances, through walls, and even glimpse possible futures. This divine gift made her the perfect ruler, watching over her children who could not see for themselves. The imperial palace rose like a mountain of black glass and silver metal, its spires reaching toward the 3 moons that hung in Nexus Prime's purple sky. Inside its halls, thousands of Zephyrians worked in perfect harmony, guided by sound, touch, and smell. They moved through the corridors like dancers, never bumping into each other, their pale blue skin seeming to glow in the soft lighting that was maintained only for their empress. Marcus Chen had been working as a janitor in the palace for 3 months now. He was the only human on Nexus Prime, brought in through a cultural exchange program that the Empire had reluctantly agreed to. Most Zephyrians found humans crude and loud, with their clumsy movements and inability to sense the subtle vibrations that made up so much of Zephyrian communication. Marcus pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallway, the wheels squeaking slightly. Several Zephyrian nobles paused in their conversations, their pointed ears twitching at the sound. They whispered to each other in their musical language, probably complaining about the noisy human again. He didn't mind. Marcus had learned long ago not to take offense when people looked down on him. Growing up in the slums of New Detroit had taught him that respect was earned through actions, not words. Besides, he found the Zephyrians fascinating. Their society was built on trust and cooperation in ways that humans had never achieved. As he worked, Marcus noticed things that others seemed to miss. The way certain servants moved with nervous energy when they thought no one was watching. The subtle changes in air circulation that suggested hidden passages. The fact that several areas of the palace were completely off-limits, even to high-ranking nobles. What puzzled him most was how the Zephyrians seemed to accept everything without question. They followed orders perfectly, worked efficiently, and never seemed to wonder about things beyond their immediate duties. It was as if they had been programmed to be the perfect citizens. One evening, as Marcus was cleaning the upper floors near the imperial throne room, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Empress Valeria was speaking with her chief advisor, an ancient Zephyrian named Lord Thane whose skin had turned almost silver with age. "The conditioning is working perfectly, Your Majesty," Thane was saying. "The neural inhibitors in the water supply continue to suppress curiosity and independent thought. Your people remain blissfully obedient." Valeria's laugh was like crystal breaking. "As it should be. My divine sight allows me to guide them perfectly. They have no need for the chaos of free will that plagues other species." Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding. Neural inhibitors? The Empress was drugging her own people? What of the human? Thane asked. His brain patterns show resistance to the inhibitors. Should we increase his dosage? No, Valeria replied thoughtfully. I want to study him. Humans are already chaotic and unpredictable. Let us see what happens when one is placed among my peaceful children. His presence may reveal weaknesses in our system that need addressing. Marcus barely made it back to his quarters before his hands started shaking. Everything he had observed suddenly made sense. The Zephyrians weren't naturally perfect citizens. They were being chemically controlled, their minds suppressed to create an artificial paradise where the Empress could play God without interference. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began paying closer attention to the palace's water systems during his cleaning duties. He discovered a complex network of pipes and filtration systems that all led back to a heavily guarded facility in the palace's lower levels. The neural inhibitors were being distributed through the drinking water, affecting every Zephyrian in the capital city. The more he learned, the more horrified he became. The Empress wasn't just controlling her people's minds, she was stealing their potential. Without curiosity, creativity, or independent thought, the Zephyrians had stagnated as a species. They were capable of so much more, but they would never realize it as long as they remained under Valeria's control. Marcus knew he had to do something, but what could one human janitor do against an empire? He had no weapons, no allies, and no way to contact the outside world. The Zephyrians trusted their Empress completely. Even if he could somehow prove what was happening, would they believe him? Would they even care? But, as he watched the Zephyrian servants go about their daily routines, brilliant minds trapped in chemical fog, potential locked away by their own ruler, Marcus felt a familiar fire building in his chest. It was the same feeling that had driven him to stand up to bullies in his neighborhood, to work 3 jobs to put himself through school, to never give up even when the odds seemed impossible. He might be just a janitor, but he was a human janitor. And humans had a long history of doing impossible things when freedom was at stake. The plan began to form slowly. Marcus couldn't attack the water treatment facility directly, it was too well guarded, and destroying it would only cause chaos without solving the real problem. Instead, he needed to find a way to wake people up gradually, to show them what they were missing without alerting the Empress to his intentions. He started small. During his cleaning rounds, Marcus would sometimes accidentally knock things over near groups of Zephyrian servants. When they bent to help clean up the mess, he would whisper questions designed to spark curiosity. "Have you ever wondered what the restricted sections of the palace contain?" he might ask while picking up scattered papers. "Do you think there are other ways to solve this problem?" he would suggest when overhearing discussions about work challenges. "What would happen if things were different?" became his favorite question. At first, the Zephyrians would simply ignore his queries or give standard responses. But Marcus noticed that some of them would pause slightly, their enhanced hearing picking up something in his tone that made them think, if only for a moment, before the chemical fog reasserted control. The breakthrough came when he met Lyra. She was a young Zephyrian who worked in the palace archives, organizing historical documents by touch and smell. Her white hair was cropped short in the style of scholarly workers, and her pale blue skin had intricate tattoos that marked her as highly educated. Unlike most Zephyrians, she seemed to retain more curiosity than others, perhaps because her work required her to constantly process new information. Marcus encountered her one evening when he was cleaning the archive chambers. She was working late, carefully cataloging ancient scrolls that had recently been discovered in an archaeological dig. Her fingers moved across the documents with incredible precision, reading the raised text faster than most humans could read with their eyes. "Interesting work?" Marcus asked as he emptied a waste bin nearby. Lyra paused, her pointed ears swiveling toward him. "The texts describe our ancestors," she said slowly. "They were different from us." "Different how?" "They questioned things. Explored. Created art and music that expressed personal feelings rather than collective harmony." She seemed confused by her own words. "I do not understand why they were so chaotic." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The inhibitors were affecting her, but not completely. Maybe they weren't chaotic, he suggested carefully. Maybe they were free. The word seemed to hit Lyra like a physical blow. She stiffened, her pale skin flushing slightly. "Free? But we are free. The Empress guides us perfectly. We want for nothing." "But what do you want?" Marcus asked. "Not what you're supposed to want, but what you actually want." Lyra opened her mouth to give the standard response, then closed it again. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still, her enhanced senses focused entirely on the question Marcus had asked. She began, then stopped. "I do not know. I have never considered such a thing." It was a start. Over the following weeks, Marcus continued his careful campaign of awakening minds. He focused on individuals who showed signs of resistance to the inhibitors, usually those whose jobs required creative thinking or historical knowledge. Slowly, carefully, he planted seeds of doubt and curiosity. He learned to recognize the signs of someone beginning to wake up. First came confusion as they noticed inconsistencies in their thoughts and feelings. Then came brief moments of clarity where they would ask unexpected questions or suggest unusual solutions to problems. Finally, came the fear as they realized that their entire understanding of reality might be wrong. Lyra was progressing faster than the others. During their evening conversations in the archives, she had begun sharing troubling insights about the historical documents she studied. The old texts speak of innovation and discovery, she whispered one night, her voice trembling slightly. Our ancestors created wonders that we have never achieved. They wrote of exploring unknown worlds, of pushing the boundaries of knowledge and art. But we have done none of these things for millennia. What changed? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. The Great Enlightenment, Lyra replied automatically, then frowned. When Empress Valeria's bloodline first gained sight and began guiding us toward perfect harmony. But, Marcus. She paused, struggling with thoughts that the inhibitors tried to suppress. What if perfect harmony is not perfect at all? That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't continue this gradual awakening indefinitely. Eventually, the Empress would notice that some of her people were beginning to think independently. When that happened, she would increase the inhibitor dosage or simply eliminate the troublemakers. He needed to accelerate the process, and that meant taking a massive risk. The next evening, Marcus approached Lyra with a proposition that could get them both killed. I need to show you something, he said quietly. But first, you need to understand that once you see it, there will be no going back. Your life, your understanding of everything you believe, it will all change forever. Lyra's pale blue skin had grown paler over the past weeks as her mind struggled against its chemical restraints. She looked exhausted, as if fighting an invisible battle every moment of every day. I dream now, she whispered. Strange dreams of colors I have never seen, of music that has no harmony, of thoughts that spiral in directions I cannot follow. The Empress says dreams are signs of mental disorder, but these dreams feel real. Marcus nodded. The inhibitors were losing their grip on her mind, but the process was clearly painful. Those dreams are your thoughts trying to break free. What I'm going to show you will hurt, but it will also liberate you completely. Show me, Lyra said without hesitation. That night, Marcus led her through service corridors he had mapped during his months of cleaning duties. They descended deep into the palace's lower levels, past security checkpoints that Marcus had learned to avoid, toward the water treatment facility that was the source of the Empire's control. As they moved through the darkness, Lyra's enhanced senses guided them both. She could hear the heartbeats of guards 3 corridors away, smell the chemical signatures that marked different areas of the complex, and feel vibrations in the walls that told her exactly where they were at all times. Your people's abilities are incredible, Marcus whispered as they paused to avoid a patrol. Without the inhibitors dulling your minds, imagine what you could accomplish. When they finally reached the water treatment facility, Marcus used access codes he had observed during his cleaning duties to bypass the security systems. The chamber beyond was vast and filled with gleaming machinery that hummed with barely contained power. Lyra stepped into the room and immediately staggered, her hands flying to her temples. I can smell it, she gasped. Chemicals in the air. Artificial compounds that should not exist in nature. Marcus led her to a control console where data scrolled across holographic displays. This is where they monitor the neural inhibitor distribution, he explained. Every drop of water in the capital city is dosed with compounds designed to suppress curiosity, creativity, and independent thought. Lyra's breathing became rapid and shallow as the full implications hit her. The entire population. For thousands of years, Marcus confirmed. Your Empress isn't guiding you toward perfection. She's keeping you in chemical chains so she can play God without interference. The scream that tore from Lyra's throat was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. It was raw anguish mixed with rage, the sound of a mind finally breaking free from artificial constraints. The noise echoed through the chamber, and Marcus knew they had seconds before security arrived. We have to go, he said urgently, grabbing her arm. But Lyra was no longer the compliant servant who had entered the chamber. Her pale blue skin had flushed dark with fury, and her enhanced senses were fully awakened for the first time in her life. She could perceive reality with a clarity that no human could imagine, and what she saw filled her with revolutionary fire. "No," she said firmly. "We do not run. We fight." The sound of approaching boots echoed through the corridors as palace guards responded to the alarm. Marcus pulled out the makeshift weapons he had prepared, tools from his janitor cart that could serve as clubs and cutting implements in desperate circumstances. But Lyra moved past him toward the water treatment controls with deadly purpose. Her fingers danced across the interface with superhuman precision, her enhanced senses allowing her to understand the complex systems in seconds. "If I cannot free them all at once," she said grimly, "then I will at least ensure they have the choice to free themselves." "What are you doing?" Marcus asked as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Lyra's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "I am giving my people the most dangerous gift in the universe," she replied. "I am giving them questions." The guards burst into the chamber just as Lyra's fingers completed their work on the control system. But by then, it was already too late to stop what she had begun. The chemical that began spreading through the capital city's water supply that night was not a neural inhibitor. It was its exact opposite, a compound that would gradually strip away the artificial barriers in every Zephyrian mind, awakening them to their true potential one painful, beautiful thought at a time. As Marcus and Lyra fought for their lives against the Empress's guards, millions of Zephyrians across the capital began to dream strange dreams of colors they had never seen and thoughts they had never been allowed to think. The revolution had begun, and there would be no stopping it now. The first signs of awakening began 3 days after Lyra had poisoned the water supply with her liberation compound. Across the capital city of Nexus Prime, Zephyrians started experiencing what their medical facilities classified as mass hysteria. Workers would pause in the middle of tasks, staring at nothing with confused expressions. Citizens would suddenly burst into tears or laughter without apparent cause. Children began asking questions that had never occurred to them before. Dr. Kale Voss, the Empire's chief medical officer, stood before Empress Valeria in the crystal throne room, his report trembling in his pale blue hands. Like all Zephyrians, he was blind, but his other senses painted a detailed picture of his surroundings. He could hear the barely contained fury in the Empress's breathing, smell the metallic scent of her anger, and feel the vibrations of her fingers drumming against her throne. "Explain to me again how this happened," Valeria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her golden eyes, the only ones of their kind in the Empire, burned with divine fire as she stared down at her subordinate. "Your Majesty, someone introduced a foreign compound into our water treatment system," Dr. Voss replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "The substance appears to be specifically designed to counteract our population management protocols." Valeria's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Population management. Such a clinical term for what keeps my children happy and obedient." She rose from her throne, her silk robes rustling like wine through dead leaves. "How many are affected?" "Initial estimates suggest that approximately 60% of the capital's population has been exposed. The effects are progressive. Those who consumed more of the contaminated water are experiencing more severe symptoms." "Severe symptoms," Valeria repeated mockingly. "You mean they are beginning to think for themselves?" Dr. Voss flinched at the accusation in her tone. "Your Majesty, perhaps if we increase the inhibitor concentration in the remaining clean water supplies." "No." Valeria walked to the massive windows that overlooked her capital city. Even from this height, her enhanced sight could see individual citizens moving through the streets below. Many of them were behaving erratically, gathering in groups to share confused conversations, their body language suggesting questions and uncertainty. Increasing the dosage now would only confirm their suspicions. "We need a more permanent solution." Meanwhile, in the palace's detention cells deep underground, Marcus Chen sat chained to a wall beside Lyra. Both of them bore the marks of their desperate battle with the guards, cuts, bruises, and exhaustion painted across their faces. But their eyes held a fire that no amount of physical pain could extinguish. "Do you think it worked?" Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. Lyra's head was tilted slightly, her enhanced hearing picking up sounds from far above them. "Listen," she said softly. "Can you hear it?" Marcus strained to catch whatever she was perceiving. At first, all he could detect was the normal background noise of a large building, ventilation systems, distant footsteps, the hum of electrical systems. But then, he began to notice something else. The pattern of footsteps was wrong. Instead of the usual rhythmic efficiency of Zephyrian movement, there were pauses, hesitations, the sound of people stopping to talk in clusters. "They are questioning," Lyra breathed, and, despite their desperate situation, she smiled. "For the first time in millennia, my people are asking questions instead of simply accepting answers." The transformation happening above them was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. In the palace archives where Lyra had worked, scholars were discovering historical documents that painted a very different picture of their civilization than they had been taught. Ancient texts spoke of Zephyrian inventors who had created wonders, artists who had expressed individual visions, and philosophers who had dared to question the nature of reality itself. Young Zephyrian named Dex, who worked in the Palace Communications Center, was among the first to experience full awakening. The Liberation Compound had hit him harder than most because his job required him to process vast amounts of information daily. As his mind cleared, he began to see patterns in the data streams that he had never noticed before. "Why do all external communications require approval from the Imperial Censorship Board?" he asked his supervisor, an older Zephyrian named Mira. Mira paused in her work, confusion flickering across her features. The question should have been simple to answer. Of course, communications required approval to maintain harmony and order. But, as the words formed in her mind, they felt hollow, meaningless. I do not know," she admitted, and the admission sent shockwaves through both their minds. Neither of them could remember the last time they had encountered a question without an immediate, comfortable answer. Dex began digging deeper into the communication records, his enhanced senses allowing him to process information at superhuman speed. What he discovered made his blood run cold. For the past 3 months, every single communication attempt from their planet to the outside galaxy had been blocked. They were completely isolated from the rest of the universe, cut off from news, trade, and even basic diplomatic contact. "Mira," he called urgently. "Look at this. We have received over 10,000 incoming messages from other star systems in the past month alone. Trade offers, diplomatic inquiries, cultural exchange requests, even personal messages from citizens who have family elsewhere." Mira moved to examine the data, her fingers flying across the interface with newfound purpose. "Where are these messages?" All of them were redirected to a secure Imperial database. None of them ever reached their intended recipients. Dex's voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "We are not just being controlled, we are being completely cut off from reality." As word spread through their network of awakening citizens, the truth became increasingly clear. The Zephyrian Empire was not the paradise they had been led to believe. It was a prison designed to look like heaven, with Empress Valeria as both god and jailer. In the lower districts of the capital, an engineer named Tor was making his own disturbing discoveries. His job involved maintaining the city's infrastructure, and, as his mind cleared, he began to notice things that should have been obvious but had somehow escaped his attention for years. The city was falling apart. Without the drive for innovation and improvement that came from free thought, the Zephyrians had stagnated technologically. Their buildings were centuries old and poorly maintained. Their transportation systems were inefficient and outdated. Even their basic utilities were running on automatic systems that no one truly understood anymore. "When was the last time we invented anything new?" Tor asked his team as they gathered around a malfunctioning power generator. The question hung in the air like a challenge. None of them could remember. Their people had once been known throughout the galaxy as brilliant innovators and creators. Now they simply maintained old systems without ever thinking to improve them. "This cannot continue," declared Vera, a construction specialist whose awakening had filled her with desperate energy. "If we do not begin advancing again, our entire civilization will collapse within a few generations." Back in the palace, Empress Valeria was receiving increasingly alarming reports from across her domain. The awakening was spreading faster than her advisors had predicted, and the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. Your Majesty, reported General Thane, the ancient military commander whose loyalty to the throne was absolute. We have identified approximately 37 individuals who appear to be completely free of the inhibitor effects. They are spreading their condition to others through some form of psychological contagion. Psychological contagion, Valeria mused. An interesting way to describe the spread of free thought. She turned from the window to face her assembled advisors, her golden eyes reflecting the light like mirrors. How long before the entire population is affected? At current rates of spread, perhaps 6 months, Dr. Voss admitted reluctantly. The compound appears to have been designed to work slowly, allowing affected individuals to gradually build tolerance to independent thought. It is remarkably sophisticated for something created by a primitive human. Valeria's smile was sharp and predatory. Do not underestimate humans, Doctor. They may be chaotic and destructive, but they have survived in a hostile universe through sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations. It is precisely that quality that makes them so dangerous to ordered societies like ours. What are your orders, Your Majesty? General Thane asked. Valeria was quiet for a long moment, considering her options. She could attempt to purge the affected population and start over with a smaller but more controllable group. She could try to develop a more powerful inhibitor that could overcome the liberation compound. Or she could take the approach that her divine sight was beginning to suggest was necessary. Bring me the human, she commanded finally. It is time I had a conversation with the creature who has dared to poison my perfect paradise. When the guards dragged Marcus from his cell an hour later, he was surprised to find himself in the Empress's private study rather than an interrogation chamber. The room was unlike anywhere else in the palace, warm and comfortable, with actual books on shelves and artwork that seemed to express individual creativity rather than collective harmony. Valeria sat behind an elegant desk, her golden eyes studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but there was something cold and alien about her perfection that made Marcus's skin crawl. Marcus Chen, she said, her voice carrying the musical quality common to all Zephyrians but with an undertone of steel. Age 32, born in the slums of New Detroit, educated through a combination of public schooling and self-directed learning. Parent died in a factory accident when you were 14, leaving you to care for a younger sister until she reached adulthood. Marcus remained silent, unsure what game the Empress was playing. You worked 7 different jobs to pay for your sister's medical school education, Valeria continued, consulting what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier. Warehouse worker, delivery driver, night security guard, restaurant cleaner, data entry clerk, construction laborer, and, finally, sanitation engineer. When she graduated and no longer needed your support, you applied for the cultural exchange program that brought you here. So? Marcus said finally. You want a medal for doing basic research? Valeria laughed, and the sound was genuinely amused rather than mocking. I find your species fascinating, Marcus Chen. Humans are the only people in the known galaxy who seem to thrive on chaos and adversity. When faced with impossible situations, instead of accepting defeat gracefully, you become more determined to overcome them. Is there a point to this conversation? The point is that I understand exactly why you did what you did, Valeria replied. You saw what you perceived as injustice, and your human nature compelled you to fight against it, even though the fight was hopeless and would likely cost you your life. Marcus met her gaze steadily. If you understand that, then you understand that I don't regret what I've done. Oh, I never assumed you would. Valeria stood and moved to the window, her sight allowing her to observe the chaos spreading through her city in real time. Tell me, Marcus Chen, what do you think will happen to my people now that you have liberated them? They'll be free to make their own choices. Will they? Valeria turned back to face him, and her expression was genuinely curious. Let me tell you what my divine sight shows me about the future you have created. Within 6 months, my perfectly ordered society will dissolve into competing factions. Some of my people will embrace the chaos you have brought them, while others will beg for the return of peaceful ignorance. Civil war will tear apart the civilization my ancestors spent millennia building. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to maintain composure.
Maybe they'll find a better way. Maybe they'll build something new. Perhaps, Valeria conceded. But, at what cost? How many will die in the transition from order to chaos? How many families will be destroyed by the conflicts that arise when people are suddenly free to pursue their own interests instead of the collective good?
Freedom is never free, Marcus replied firmly.
But, slavery disguised as paradise is still slavery.
Valeria nodded slowly, as if he had confirmed something she had expected him to say.
That is a very human perspective, Marcus Chen. But, tell me this, if I offered you a choice right now, would you take it? What choice? I can create an antidote to the compound your friend introduced into our water supply. I can return my people to their peaceful ignorance and prevent the chaos that is coming. In exchange, I will allow you and the librarian to leave my empire safely. You can return to human space with the knowledge that you tried to do the right thing, and my people can return to their contentment.
Marcus stared at her, his mind racing.
The offer was tempting in ways he hadn't expected. If Valeria was right about the future, then his actions might lead to immense suffering for millions of innocent people.
But, could he trust her?
And, even if he could, did he have the right to make that choice for an entire civilization?
Why would you offer me this? He asked suspiciously.
Because my divine sight has shown me something interesting, Valeria replied with a mysterious smile. The future where you accept my offer is not the only possible outcome.
There is another path, one where the chaos you have unleashed leads to something neither of us can predict.
And, which outcome do you prefer?
Valeria's golden eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. That, Marcus Chen, is the first interesting question anyone has asked me in 1,000 years. Outside the palace walls, the revolution was gathering momentum with each passing hour. In secret meetings throughout the capital, awakened Zephyrians shared information and began to organize.
They discovered that their isolation from the outside galaxy was even more complete than they had realized.
Their technology had stagnated so severely that they were now centuries behind other civilizations. But, they also discovered something else. In the restricted archives that were normally accessible only to the Empress and her closest advisors, a group of awakened scholars found records that painted a very different picture of their planet's recent history. Look at this, whispered Nara, a young archivist whose awakening had filled her with burning curiosity.
Communication logs from 50 years ago. Our people were in contact with a federation of democratic planets. They were offering us membership, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs.
Her companion, an older scholar named Jorik, leaned over the ancient display.
What happened to these negotiations?
According to this, they were terminated when Empress Valeria declared that outside contact would corrupt the purity of our society, Nara replied grimly.
But, look at the terms they were offering. Advanced medical technology that could restore sight to our people.
Educational exchanges that would have accelerated our development by centuries.
Even terraforming assistance to make our secondary planets habitable. Jorik's pale blue skin had gone even paler as the implications sank in.
She condemned our entire species to stagnation and isolation.
How many of our people could have been saved if we had access to advanced medical care? How many worlds could we have colonized? How many discoveries could we have made?
Meanwhile, in the city's communication center, Dex had made an even more disturbing discovery. Hidden in the deepest archives of the communication system, he found evidence of ongoing contact between the Empress and the outside galaxy. She has been trading with other civilizations for decades, he told Mira, his voice shaking with rage.
Look at these shipping manifests.
Rare minerals, artistic treasures, even genetic samples. She has been selling our resources and our cultural heritage to maintain her own power and luxury.
Mira studied the data with growing horror. But, what has she been trading for?
Dex highlighted a series of encrypted files.
Advanced surveillance technology. Mind control research. And, this.
He paused, his enhanced senses confirming what the data suggested.
Longevity treatments.
She should have died of old age centuries ago, but she has been using technology purchased with our stolen wealth to extend her life indefinitely. As the scope of the Empress's betrayal became clear, the awakened Zephyrians began to organize into something resembling a resistance movement. They called themselves the Clarity, and their goal was simple: expose the truth to their people and establish a government that served the population rather than enslaving it. But they faced enormous challenges. Most of the population was still under the influence of the neural inhibitors, making them resistant to new ideas and suspicious of change. The military and security forces remained loyal to the Empress, their conditioning reinforced by additional chemical treatments that made them nearly impossible to reach. Most importantly, they lacked any real understanding of how to govern themselves. For thousands of years, their people had simply followed orders and trusted that the Empress knew what was best for them. The concept of democracy, of individual rights and responsibilities, was foreign to them. It was Lyra who proposed the solution that would change everything. "We need help," she told the gathered leaders of the Clarity during a clandestine meeting in an abandoned warehouse.
"We cannot learn to be free overnight.
But there are others in the galaxy who have faced similar challenges."
"You mean humans," said Tor, the engineer who had become one of their primary organizers. "Not just humans," Lyra replied.
"According to the historical records, there are dozens of species that have overthrown oppressive governments and established free societies.
If we can somehow contact them, if we can ask for help."
"How?"
demanded Vera.
"All communications are monitored by Imperial sensors."
"Even if we could get a message out, why would anyone help us?"
Lyra smiled, and there was something fierce and determined in her expression that reminded everyone present of the human who had started this revolution.
"Because," she said simply, "freedom is contagious.
And there are some things in the universe that are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless." Back in the palace detention cells, Marcus was struggling with the choice that Empress Valeria had offered him. He could end the chaos he had started and spare millions of people the pain of transition from slavery to freedom. All he had to do was say yes, and everything could go back to the way it was. But, as he sat in his cell, he thought about his sister Sarah, who had become a doctor despite growing up in poverty. He thought about the teachers who had refused to give up on him even when he was falling asleep in class from exhaustion after working all night. He thought about every person who had ever chosen the difficult path of progress over the easy path of acceptance. Most of all, he thought about Lyra and the look in her sightless eyes when she had finally understood what freedom meant. The awakening had been painful for her, but it had also been beautiful. For the first time in her life, she had been truly alive. Marcus closed his eyes and made his choice. When the guards came to escort him back to the Empress for his answer, he was ready. But he had no idea that his decision would trigger events that would shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. Marcus stood before Empress Valeria in her private study, his decision burning like fire in his chest. The golden-eyed ruler watched him with the patient intensity of a predator, waiting for his answer to the impossible choice she had offered. "I've made my decision," Marcus said firmly.
"Keep your antidote. My people have a saying, give me liberty or give me death. Your people deserve the same choice, even if it's painful."
Valeria's lips curved in what might have been a smile.
"Fascinating.
Even when faced with the suffering your choice will cause, you still choose chaos over order." She moved to her desk and activated a holographic display showing the city below.
"Very well, Marcus-chan.
Let me show you what your human stubbornness has unleashed." The display revealed scenes of growing unrest throughout the capital. Groups of awakened Zephyrians gathered in public spaces, their animated conversations creating a buzz of activity that the city hadn't seen in centuries. But there were also scenes of confusion and fear as citizens struggled to understand the changes happening in their minds.
"Observe," Valeria said, highlighting one particular gathering. "Those are factory workers who have realized that they have been performing the same meaningless tasks for decades without question.
They are beginning to ask why their labor is necessary, why they cannot pursue more fulfilling work, why their lives have been reduced to mechanical repetition." Marcus watched as the workers' discussion became more heated. Their body language suggested frustration and anger, but also excitement and hope. "And here," Valeria continued, shifting the display to another location, "are educators who have discovered that the history they have been teaching contains significant omissions and distortions.
They are questioning not just what they have taught, but their entire understanding of reality. The scene showed teachers gathered around ancient texts, their faces expressing shock and dismay as they uncovered lies that had shaped their civilization for millennia. Your liberation compound has created a cascade effect, Valeria explained. Each newly awakened individual becomes a vector for spreading consciousness to others. Within weeks, my entire population will be affected. Good, Marcus said defiantly. They deserve to know the truth. Do they? Valeria's tone remained calm, but her golden eyes flashed with something dangerous. Let me show you the future my divine sight reveals. The holographic display shifted to show projected scenarios based on current trends. Marcus watched in growing horror as the images depicted civil unrest escalating into violence, infrastructure collapsing as workers abandoned their posts to seek more meaningful work, and the carefully balanced social systems that had maintained peace for millennia crumbling into chaos. This is what freedom looks like for a population that has never had to govern itself, Valeria said softly. They will tear apart everything they have built in their rush to embrace independence they do not understand. You're lying, Marcus insisted, though doubt not at him. You're showing me worst-case scenarios to make me second-guess myself. Perhaps, Valeria conceded. But my divine sight has never been wrong before. Tell me, Marcus Chen, are you prepared to accept responsibility for every death that occurs during the transition from order to chaos? Before Marcus could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Valeria's expression shifted from calm superiority to sharp alertness as she accessed emergency communication channels. Your Majesty, came the panicked voice of General Thane. We have a situation in the communications center. A group of awakened citizens has taken control of the primary transmission array. Valeria's face went pale. Are they attempting external communication? Yes, Your Majesty. They appear to be broadcasting a distress signal to the Galactic Federation. For the first time since Marcus had met her, Empress Valeria looked genuinely afraid. Lock down all external communications immediately. Deploy security forces to retake the facility. We have tried, Your Majesty, but the facility's defenses have been turned against us. The awakened workers have superior knowledge of the systems and are using their enhanced senses to anticipate our movements. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. The Zephyrians were fighting back, but they were also escalating a conflict that could get them all killed. In the communications center, Dex worked frantically to maintain their jury-rigged connection to the outside galaxy while Mira and her team held off security forces with improvised weapons and superior tactical awareness. Their enhanced hearing allowed them to track the movements of guards throughout the building, giving them an almost supernatural advantage in defensive combat. How much longer do you need? Mira called out as she directed her people to block another entrance. The signal is getting through, but the Federation's nearest ships are days away, Dex replied, his fingers flying over the communication controls. We need to hold this position until help arrives. Or until we can convince enough of the population to join us, suggested Nara, the young archivist who had become one of their key strategists. Each hour we maintain this broadcast, more people are hearing the truth about our situation. The broadcast itself was simple but devastating. Using historical records and communication logs they had uncovered, the clarity was revealing the full scope of the Empress's deception to any Zephyrian with access to a communication device. The evidence was undeniable. Their civilization had been deliberately isolated and suppressed for centuries. Across the planet, the reaction was explosive. Workers abandoned their posts. Students demanded access to forbidden knowledge. Even some military personnel began questioning orders that suddenly seemed meaningless and oppressive. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Captain Sarah Chen of the Federation medical ship Hippocrates had been monitoring routine communication channels when she picked up fragments of the Zephyrian distress signal. The name in the transmission made her blood run cold. Marcus Chen, she whispered, staring at the communication display. My brother. Sarah had spent the last 3 months assuming that Marcus was safe on his cultural exchange assignment. The Zephyrian Empire had been classified as peaceful and stable, with no known conflicts or dangers to visiting personnel.
But, the fragments of the distress signal painted a very different picture.
Navigation, set course for the Zephyrian system, maximum speed, she ordered.
Communication, contact the Federation Council and request immediate assistance for a developing humanitarian crisis. The Hippocrates was primarily a medical vessel, equipped with advanced healing technology and a small but highly trained crew. It was not designed for military intervention, but Sarah Chen was not about to abandon her brother to an alien despot without a fight. Back on Nexus Prime, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Empress Valeria had deployed her elite guard units to retake the communications center, but the awakened Zephyrians were proving far more resourceful than anyone had anticipated. "They are using the building systems against us," General Thane reported grimly. "They have rerouted power conduits, modified ventilation systems to disperse sedative gases, and even reprogrammed maintenance robots to serve as defensive units. Their newfound creativity is making them unpredictable and dangerous." Valeria paced her study like a caged predator, her divine sight showing her futures that grew more chaotic with each passing hour.
What about the population response to their broadcast? Significant unrest in major population centers.
Workers are organizing into what they call awakening circles, sharing information and planning coordinated resistance to imperial authority.
Some military units are experiencing defections. How many remain loyal?
Approximately 60% of our forces are still responding to orders, but their effectiveness is compromised by doubt and confusion. The awakened rebels have superior knowledge of our systems and tactics. Valeria stopped pacing and turned to Marcus, who had been watching the unfolding crisis with a mixture of hope and horror.
"This is what your freedom has brought my people.
Chaos, violence, and the destruction of everything they have built." "It's also brought them truth," Marcus replied stubbornly. "They're fighting because they finally understand what's been done to them."
"And, when the fighting is over, what then? Do you think your Federation will welcome a planet full of refugees? Do you think other civilizations will trust a species that destroyed itself rather than accept peaceful guidance?"
Before Marcus could answer, a new alarm echoed through the palace. This one was different, not the harsh warning of internal security breaches, but the melodious tone that indicated incoming external communication. Valeria's face went ashen as she accessed the communication system. The message was brief but devastating. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Federation medical vessel Hippocrates. We are responding to a distress signal from Nexus Prime and will arrive in 16 hours.
Any interference with our mission will be considered an act of war against the Galactic Federation."
"Sarah," Marcus breathed, recognizing his sister's voice. Relief and terror warred in his chest as he realized that help was coming, but that it might arrive too late to prevent a massacre. Valeria's golden eyes blazed with fury as she turned to face him.
"Your sister, I presume? How touching. But, one medical ship against an entire empire?
She will be destroyed before she can even enter our atmosphere." "You don't know Sarah," Marcus said with growing confidence. "She's fought through worse odds than this."
"Has she?" Valeria's smile was sharp and predatory. "Let me tell you what my divine sight shows me about your sister's arrival.
She will attempt a rescue operation with inadequate force and insufficient understanding of our capabilities. Her ship will be captured, and she will join you in my detention cells. The Federation will then have to choose between abandoning both of you or escalating to military action that could devastate this entire system."
The implications were staggering.
If Valeria was right, Marcus's actions could trigger a war between the Federation and the Zephyrian Empire, with his sister caught in the crossfire. But, in the communications center, Dex had intercepted the same transmission, and the mention of a Federation medical ship had given him a dangerous idea.
"Medical ship," he said urgently to Mira.
"If they have advanced healing technology, they might also have neural interface equipment that could help us reach the people who are still under the influence of the inhibitors."
Mira's enhanced hearing caught the subtle implications in his tone.
"You want to use their medical systems to accelerate the awakening process." "More than that," Dex replied, his mind racing with possibilities. "If we can establish a communication link with their ship, we might be able to download their entire medical database. Imagine having access to technology that could not just free our people's minds, but restore their sight as well. The idea was audacious and dangerous, but it offered hope for something that none of them had dared to imagine: the possibility that freedom and the restoration of their natural abilities might be achievable simultaneously. In the lower levels of the palace, Lyra sat in her cell, her enhanced senses tracking the movements of guards and the distant sounds of conflict. She could hear the broadcasts from the communications center, smell the fear and excitement of awakening minds throughout the city, and feel the vibrations of approaching ships through the planet's crust. But, most importantly, she could sense something else, a change in the very air around her that suggested the neural inhibitor distribution system was finally failing. Whether through sabotage or system breakdown, the chemical fog that had clouded Zephyrian minds for centuries was lifting faster than anyone had anticipated. "Marcus," she whispered to the human in the adjacent cell.
"Can you feel it?" "Feel what?" "The awakening. It is accelerating.
Your sister's arrival has given our people hope, and hope is the most powerful catalyst for consciousness that exists." Marcus strained to sense whatever Lyra was perceiving, but his human senses were limited compared to her superhuman awareness. Still, he could detect something: a change in the background noise of the palace, a shift in the rhythm of footsteps and conversations that suggested people were moving with new purpose and determination.
"What does that mean for us?" Lyra's smile was fierce and determined.
"It means that the revolution you started is about to become something far greater than either of us imagined."
"Your people are coming, Marcus.
But they will not be rescuing us from a prison. They will be joining us in a war for the future of an entire species." Above them, Empress Valeria stood at the window of her study, her divine sight showing her futures that grew more uncertain with each passing moment. For the first time in her eternal life, she could not see a clear path to victory. The chaos that the human had unleashed was spreading beyond her ability to control, and the approaching Federation ship represented a wildcard that her precognitive abilities could not fully account for. "General Thane," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of divine command,
"prepare all defense systems for battle.
If the Federation wants to interfere in our internal affairs, they will discover that Paradise is worth defending with any means necessary." "Your Majesty," Thane replied hesitantly, "our defensive capabilities have not been tested in combat for centuries."
"Against modern Federation technology. They will suffice," Valeria interrupted.
"And if they do not, then we will ensure that the cost of victory is too high for the Federation to bear." The threat was clear. If she could not maintain control through manipulation and chemical suppression, Empress Valeria was prepared to destroy her own people rather than allow them to be free. In the communications center, Dex detected the activation of the planet's ancient defense systems and realized with growing horror what the Empress was planning. The orbital defense platforms that ringed Nexus Prime were powerful enough to destroy any ship that approached without permission. But they were also close enough to the planet's surface that their destruction could rain debris down on major population centers. "She is planning to turn this into a siege," he told Mira urgently. "If we cannot evacuate the civilians before the Federation ship arrives, then we evacuate them," Mira replied grimly.
"Send out a general broadcast. Tell everyone to get as far from the capital as possible. That will trigger mass panic.
The alternative is mass casualties when those defense platforms start firing." As evacuation warnings began broadcasting across the planet, the approaching Federation medical ship continued its urgent journey toward a world in the grip of revolution. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, studying tactical displays that showed her the increasingly desperate situation her brother had stumbled into. "Captain," reported her tactical officer, "we are detecting significant military activity around Nexus Prime. It appears they are preparing orbital defenses."
Sarah's jaw tightened with determination.
The Hippocrates was a medical ship, but it was still a Federation vessel with advanced shielding and defensive capabilities. More importantly, it carried something that might tip the balance of the coming conflict: medical technology that could break the chemical chains binding an entire civilization.
"Prepare for hostile contact," she ordered.
"And begin charging the neural interface arrays. If my brother is right about what is happening on that planet, we are going to need every tool at our disposal to help those people." The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of the Zephyrian Empire. On one side stood an immortal despot with divine sight and the power to control minds. On the other stood a handful of awakened rebels, a human janitor, and a Federation medical ship racing against time. But the most important factor in the coming battle was not military might or advanced technology. It was the power of an idea that had already taken root in millions of minds, the simple, dangerous, irresistible concept that every thinking being deserved the right to choose their own destiny. The revolution had begun with questions whispered in the darkness. Now it would be decided by the clash of starships among the purple skies of Nexus Prime. The Federation medical ship Hippocrates dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyrian system, its sensors immediately detecting the massive orbital defense platforms surrounding Nexus Prime.
Captain Saracen studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The defenses were ancient but still formidable, designed to protect the planet from any external threat.
"Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, her tactical officer, "I'm reading 12 orbital platforms, each armed with plasma cannons and missile batteries.
They're powering up weapons systems. Any response to our diplomatic hails?" Sarah asked. "Nothing, Captain.
They're maintaining communication silence."
Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she thought about Marcus trapped on the planet below. Her brother had always been too stubborn for his own good, but she had never imagined his idealism would land him in the middle of an interstellar incident. What about the distress signals from the planet's surface?
"Still broadcasting, but they're fragmented," reported Ensign Park from the communications station. "It appears there's active jamming from multiple sources, probably internal conflict between government forces and rebels." Through the bridge windows, Sarah could see Nexus Prime hanging in space like a jewel against the darkness. 3 purple moons cast ethereal light across its surface, making it look deceptively peaceful. But her sensors told a different story: massive population movements, energy signatures suggesting combat, and, most disturbing of all, the steady buildup of power in those orbital defense platforms. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, the situation had deteriorated into open warfare. The communications center had become the focal point of the conflict, with awakened Zephyrians using their superior senses and intimate knowledge of the building systems to hold off wave after wave of Imperial forces. Dex crouched behind an improvised barricade, his fingers flying over a portable communication array as he tried to maintain contact with the approaching Federation ship. Around him, the sounds of battle echoed through the corridors, energy weapons discharging, metal being torn apart, and the occasional scream of pain or triumph. "I have them," he called out to Mira, who was coordinating their defenses from a nearby position. "The Federation ship is requesting detailed information about the situation." "Tell them about the orbital defenses," Mira replied, dodging a burst of energy fire from Imperial troops. "If they try a direct approach, they will be destroyed before they can help anyone." But, as Dex began transmitting tactical data to the Hippocrates, he detected something that made his enhanced senses scream in alarm. The energy signatures from the palace were shifting, indicating that Empress Valeria was preparing to activate systems that had been dormant for centuries. "Mira," he said urgently, "the Empress is powering up something massive in the palace. The energy readings are off the scale." Myra's pale blue skin went even paler as she processed the implications. She would not dare. Dare what? The Imperial Citadel has a planetary defense system that was built during the ancient wars. If she activates it... Myra's voice trailed off as the full horror of the situation became clear. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, in chambers that had not been accessed in over 1,000 years, ancient machinery began to hum with deadly purpose. Empress Valeria stood before the control systems of the planetary annihilation device, her golden eyes reflecting the glow of activation sequences that should never have been needed. "Your Majesty," General Thane said nervously, "surely this is unnecessary. The Federation ship is only a medical vessel." "The ship itself is not the threat," Valeria replied calmly. "The threat is what it represents, external interference in our perfect society. If I allow them to land, if I permit them to see what we have built here, other civilizations will follow. They will bring their chaos, their questions, their infectious belief that every individual should be free to make their own mistakes." The planetary defense system was a relic from the days when the Zephyrians had been a warlike species, before the Great Enlightenment had brought them under Imperial control. It was designed to turn the planet's core into a massive fusion bomb, destroying everything within several light-years as a final defense against invasion. "The system will destroy us as well," Thane pointed out desperately. "Perhaps," Valeria acknowledged. "But, better a perfect civilization should die intact than be corrupted by external influences. My divine sight shows me that this may be the only way to preserve what we have built." In his cell, Marcus felt the vibrations through the palace floor as the ancient machinery came online. He didn't understand what was happening, but his human instincts told him that whatever Valeria was doing, it was catastrophic. "Lyra," he called to the adjacent cell, "what is she doing?" Lyra's enhanced senses were picking up energy signatures that filled her with primal terror. "She is preparing to destroy the planet," she whispered. "There are legends, stories from the old times about a weapon that could crack worlds. I thought they were myths. Can she actually do it? If the legends are true, then, yes. The weapon was designed to be activated by someone with divine sight, someone who could see the future clearly enough to make such an ultimate decision." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. His attempt to free the Zephyrian people had triggered a response that could kill everyone on the planet. The weight of responsibility was crushing, but it also clarified his thoughts with painful precision. "We have to stop her," he said simply. "How?" "We are locked in cells, guarded by her loyal troops. Even if we could escape, the activation chamber is probably sealed and heavily defended." Marcus thought about his sister approaching in her medical ship, about the awakened Zephyrians fighting for their freedom in the communications center, about millions of innocent people who were about to pay the ultimate price for his idealism. "There has to be a way," he insisted. "Humans don't give up. We find a way or we make one." Above them, the battle for the communications center had reached a critical point. Imperial forces had brought in heavy weapons and were systematically destroying the building's defenses. But the awakened rebels had one advantage that their enemies couldn't match: desperation born of hope. "They are breaking through on levels 3 and 5, Nara reported, her archival skills proving useful for tracking enemy movements through the building sensors. "Fall back to the transmission core," Mira ordered. "We just need to hold out until the Federation ship arrives." "If it arrives," Dex said grimly. He had been monitoring the orbital defenses and could see that they were targeting the approaching medical vessel. "The platforms are preparing to fire. Even with Federation shielding, a medical ship cannot withstand that kind of concentrated attack." On the bridge of the Hippocrates, Captain Sarah Chen faced the same grim calculus. Her ship's sensors showed that the orbital platforms were charging their weapons, preparing to turn her vessel into scattered atoms before she could get anywhere near the planet. "Options?" she asked her bridge crew. "We could try an evasive approach," Lieutenant Commander Torres suggested. "Come in fast and low, using the planet's magnetic field to mask our approach." "That would still leave us vulnerable for at least 30 seconds, Ensign Park pointed out. "More than enough time for those platforms to target and destroy us." Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The platforms were powerful, but they were also ancient. Their targeting systems would be based on technology that was centuries old, possibly vulnerable to electronic warfare. "What about our medical systems?" she asked suddenly. "Do we have any neural interface equipment that could be adapted for electronic jamming?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Torres caught on immediately. The neural mapping arrays might be able to disrupt their targeting computers, but we would have to get much closer to establish a link. "How close?" "Dangerously close. We would be well within their weapons range before we could establish any kind of electronic countermeasure." Sarah thought about Marcus and the desperate rebels fighting on the planet below. Her brother had always been willing to take impossible risks for what he believed in. Now it was her turn. "Do it," she ordered. "Set course for the planet, maximum speed. Charge all medical systems and prepare for electronic countermeasures." As the Hippocrates accelerated toward Nexus Prime, the orbital defense platforms detected the incoming threat and began powering their weapons to full capacity. But they were not the only systems coming online in the Zephyrian system.
Deep in the planet's core, the ancient annihilation device continued its activation sequence. The process was designed to be irreversible once initiated, preventing enemies from capturing and disabling the weapon.
Empress Valeria watched the countdown with calm satisfaction, secure in the knowledge that she was preserving the purity of her civilization. But, in the communications center, Dex had detected the energy buildup and was frantically trying to warn the approaching Federation ship.
"Medical vessel, this is Nexus Prime Rebels," he transmitted. "Abort your approach immediately. The Empress has activated a planetary destruction device. Repeat, abort approach. The entire planet is about to be destroyed." On the bridge of the Hippocrates, the transmission sent shockwaves through the crew.
A planetary annihilation weapon was beyond anything they had prepared for. "Captain," Torres said urgently, "we should withdraw to safe distance and call for military support." Sarah stared at the planet hanging in space before them, knowing that Marcus was down there somewhere, probably unaware that he had minutes to live. "No," she said firmly.
"If that weapon activates, everyone on the planet dies. Military support would take days to arrive. We are their only hope. Captain, we are a medical ship.
We do not have the capability to stop a planetary weapon."
"Maybe not," Sarah admitted. "But we have something else.
We have medical technology that could give the rebels down there the tools they need to stop it themselves." The plan that formed in her mind was audacious and probably suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. Instead of trying to land safely and conduct a traditional rescue operation, she would attempt something that had never been tried before: a combat medical deployment using neural interface technology to enhance the capabilities of the rebel forces.
"Prepare for emergency medical deployment," she ordered. "I want every neural enhancement device we have loaded into the transport pods."
"Captain, those devices are experimental and potentially dangerous to non-human physiology," the chief medical officer protested.
"More dangerous than planetary annihilation?" Sarah shot back. "Do it."
As the Hippocrates raced toward its date with destiny, the situation on the planet's surface continued to deteriorate. Imperial forces had finally breached the communications center's defenses and were fighting their way toward the transmission core where Dex and his team were making their last stand.
"How much longer until the planetary weapon activates?"
Mira asked as she reloaded her energy weapon with the last power cell they had.
Dex checked his readings with growing despair. "Less than an hour.
And even if we somehow manage to reach the activation chamber, the security systems are designed to prevent tampering. Only someone with divine sight can shut down the device once it has been activated."
"Then, we need the Empress," Nara said grimly.
"We need to capture her and force her to deactivate the weapon."
It was a desperate plan, but it was the only option they had left.
The problem was that the Empress was protected by layers of security and loyal troops, while the rebels were trapped in a building that was about to be overrun by Imperial forces.
That was when the miracle happened.
In the detention cells beneath the palace, Marcus had been working on the lock mechanism with tools improvised from his janitor equipment. His months of maintaining the palace's systems had given him intimate knowledge of how everything worked, including the supposedly secure holding facilities. Almost there, he grunted, manipulating the electronic lock with a makeshift probe fashioned from cleaning supplies. "Even if you free us, the corridors are full of guards," Lyra pointed out.
"Not all of them," Marcus replied. "I know the service passages better than anyone. We can reach the main levels without being detected." "And then, what? Do you plan to challenge the Empress to single combat?"
Marcus's smile was grim and determined.
"Something like that. You said only someone with divine sight can shut down the weapon?" "According to the legends, yes. What if someone could temporarily share that sight? What if we could use the neural interface technology from my sister's ship to give one of us the ability to see what the Empress sees?" Lyra stared at him in amazement. That is completely insane. But, is it possible? I do not know. The neural pathways required for divine sight are fundamentally different from normal Zephyrian brain structures.
Attempting to artificially create them could cause permanent brain damage or death.
But, it could work? Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her enhanced senses picking up the approaching sounds of combat from above. Finally, she nodded slowly. It could work. If we could access the medical technology from your sister's ship, if we could reach the Empress, if we could survive the procedure, yes, it might be possible. The lock finally gave way with a soft click, and Marcus pushed open the cell door. Then, let's go save the galaxy. As they made their way through the service passages toward the palace's main levels, neither of them knew that high above them, the Hippocrates was beginning its desperate run through the orbital defenses. The ancient platforms had detected the approaching ship and were preparing to fire, their weapons charged with enough energy to vaporize any vessel in the galaxy. But Captain Sarah Chen had one advantage that the platform commanders didn't expect. She was Marcus Chen's sister, and she had inherited the same stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. All hands, brace for impact, she announced over the ship's communication system. We are going in. The battle for the soul of the Zephyrian Empire was about to reach its climax, with the fate of an entire species hanging in the balance. On one side stood the forces of order and control, backed by ancient weapons and divine authority. On the other stood a handful of rebels, a human janitor, and a medical ship racing against time. But the most important battle was not being fought in space or in the corridors of the palace. It was being fought in the minds of millions of awakened Zephyrians who were choosing, for the first time in their lives, between the safety of slavery and the danger of freedom. The revolution that had begun with whispered questions was about to be decided by the ultimate question of all: what was a life worth if it was not freely chosen? The orbital defense platforms opened fire just as the Hippocrates reached the outer atmosphere of Nexus Prime. Brilliant beams of plasma energy lanced through space, each one capable of reducing a starship to component atoms. Captain Sarah Chen gripped her command chair as the ship bucked and rolled under the impact of near misses. Shields down to 60%, Lieutenant Commander Torres reported. We cannot survive many more hits like that. Neural interference arrays? Sarah demanded. Deploying now, Ensign Park replied, her fingers flying over the medical system's interface. We are attempting to link with the platform targeting computers. On the screen, Sarah could see the ancient defense stations adjusting their aim for another volley. The Hippocrates was fast for a medical vessel, but not fast enough to outrun directed energy weapons at this range. Then, something unexpected happened. The neural interface arrays, designed to map and modify brain patterns, found purchase in the primitive computer systems controlling the platforms. The targeting algorithms, based on technology thousands of years old, could not adapt to the sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities of Federation medical equipment. They are losing target lock, Torres announced with amazement. Their targeting systems are receiving conflicting data from their sensors. Excellent. Take us down to the capital city, emergency speed. As the Hippocrates dove through the purple atmosphere toward the surface, the orbital platforms continued firing blind, their ancient systems overwhelmed by neural feedback that made them perceive multiple targets where only one existed. On the surface, Marcus and Lyra had reached the main palace levels through the service passages. The corridors were filled with the sounds of battle as Imperial forces tried to maintain order against an increasingly desperate population. Through the windows, they could see the sky lit up by weapons fire as the Federation ship fought its way through the orbital defenses. The medical bay is 3 levels up, Marcus said, consulting the mental map he had built during his months of cleaning duties. If we can reach it before the ship lands. Behind you, Lyra interrupted, her enhanced hearing detecting approaching guards. They pressed themselves against the wall as a squad of Imperial troops ran past, their attention focused on the external threat rather than escaped prisoners. When the soldiers were gone, Marcus and Lyra continued their desperate race through the palace. In the communications center, Dex and his remaining rebels were making their final stand against overwhelming Imperial forces. The transmission equipment was damaged, but still functional enough to maintain contact with the approaching Federation ship. Medical vessel, this is Rebel Command, he transmitted. We have confirmed that the planetary weapon is in its final activation phase. You have less than 30 minutes before detonation. The reply came back immediately, Rebel Command, this is Captain Chen. We are deploying medical enhancement packages to your location. Prepare for emergency neural interface procedures. Neural interface procedures? Mira asked, confused.
Dex's enhanced senses detected the subtle vibrations of something large and fast approaching their building. I think the Federation ship is about to attempt something that has never been tried before. The transport pods launched from the Hippocrates as it skimmed low over the capital city, their trajectory calculated to penetrate the communications center through its damaged roof. Each pod contained experimental neural enhancement technology that could temporarily boost Zephyrian sensory and cognitive abilities to superhuman levels. But the procedure was dangerous and largely untested. No one knew what the side effects might be, or whether Zephyrian physiology could survive the enhancement process.
Are we really going to do this? Nara asked as the first pod crashed through the ceiling in a shower of debris and twisted metal.
The alternative is planetary annihilation, Mira replied grimly.
I would rather die trying to be more than I am than die as a slave.
The neural enhancement devices that spilled from the pods looked like metallic crowns, each one equipped with thousands of microfilaments designed to interface directly with brain tissue. The technology was based on Federation medical research into treating severe neural trauma, but it had never been tested on healthy subjects, let alone alien physiology. Dex approached the nearest device with a mixture of fear and determination.
If this kills me, make sure the others know that we tried. He placed the crown on his head and activated the interface sequence.
The initial sensation was indescribable, like having his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical form.
His already enhanced Zephyrian senses exploded into capabilities that bordered on the supernatural.
He could hear the heartbeats of every person in the building, smell the chemical composition of the air down to individual molecules, and feel vibrations through solid matter that painted a perfect three-dimensional map of everything within kilometers. But, more than that, he could perceive patterns and connections that had been invisible before. The planetary weapon, he gasped, his mind processing information at superhuman speed.
I can sense its energy signature.
The activation sequence follows a mathematical pattern based on quantum resonance frequencies.
Can you stop it? Mira demanded, preparing to don her own neural crown. Not from here.
But I can see the control pathways. The weapon can be shut down from 3 locations: the primary control room where the Empress is located, a secondary station in the palace archives, or
what? The weapon's core itself.
If someone could reach the planetary core and manually interrupt the fusion cascade, the detonation could be prevented. Mira activated her own neural enhancement device, her mind exploding with new capabilities. Together with Dex, she began to perceive the true scope of the crisis facing their world. The planetary weapon was more than just a fusion bomb, it was designed to destabilize the planet's core in a way that would create a chain reaction, turning their entire world into a short-lived star. The energy release would sterilize everything within several light years, making it impossible for any evidence of their civilization to survive. She really means to destroy everything rather than allow us to be free, Mira whispered in horror. But she also saw something else. The enhancement procedure was spreading beyond the rebels in the communications center. Every Zephyrian who had been exposed to the liberation compound was experiencing accelerated awakening as their minds adapted to new neural pathways. Across the planet, millions of people were beginning to think and perceive with clarity they had never imagined possible. In the palace medical bay, Marcus and Lyra found themselves face to face with technology that neither of them fully understood. The Federation medical equipment that had been hastily deployed was designed for emergency neural surgery, not the kind of artificial enhancement they were attempting. The neural crown will give me temporary access to the same pathways that create divine sight, Lyra explained as she studied the alien devices. But the process could kill me, and even if it works, I might only have minutes before my brain burns out from the overload. There has to be another way, Marcus insisted.
There is no other way. The weapon can only be deactivated by someone with divine sight.
If I cannot gain that ability artificially, then everyone on this planet dies. Marcus watched as Lyra prepared to sacrifice herself for the chance to save her people. The courage she was showing reminded him of every hero he had ever admired, every person who had chosen to risk everything for the possibility of freedom.
"Let me do it," he said suddenly. "What?" "Let me use the device. If it kills me, you can still try.
If it works, maybe my human brain can handle the overload better than your Zephyrian physiology."
Lyra stared at him in amazement. "Marcus, you do not understand.
Divine sight is not just enhanced perception, it is the ability to see across time itself, to perceive the interconnected web of cause and effect that shapes reality.
No human has ever possessed such abilities. Then, I'll be the first."
Before Lyra could protest, Marcus placed the neural crown on his head and activated the interface sequence. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His consciousness exploded outward, encompassing not just his immediate surroundings but the flow of time itself. He could see the past and present and multiple possible futures stretching out like branches on an infinite tree. He saw the moment when the first Zephyrian Empress had gained divine sight through genetic mutation, the centuries of gradual social control that had followed, and the countless small choices that had led to this moment of ultimate crisis. But, most importantly, he could see the paths that led to survival. "I can see it," he gasped, his human brain struggling to process information that no mortal mind was designed to handle. "The control room is 3 levels down, but it is heavily guarded. The archives are closer, but the secondary controls there are damaged."
"But there is a third option." "What?" Lyra demanded. "The weapons core is accessible through the old maintenance tunnels.
If someone could reach it and manually trigger an electromagnetic pulse at exactly the right moment, the fusion cascade would collapse harmlessly."
"That someone would be vaporized instantly by the radiation."
Marcus's smile was grim but determined.
"Not necessarily. The Federation ship has emergency transport capabilities. If the timing is perfect, if everything goes exactly right."
If, Lyra said desperately. "Those are not acceptable odds."
"They are the only odds we have." As they prepared to attempt the impossible, the battle raging throughout the capital had reached a tipping point.
The awakened Zephyrians, enhanced by Federation neural technology, were proving far more capable than anyone had anticipated. Their superhuman senses and newfound tactical creativity were overwhelming Imperial forces who had become too dependent on chemical compliance from their opponents. In the communications center, Dex and his enhanced team had managed to establish direct contact with every rebel cell across the planet. The neural crowns had given them the ability to coordinate their efforts with perfect precision, turning a chaotic uprising into a synchronized revolution. Palace Archives team reports they have secured the secondary control station, Nara announced, her enhanced cognitive abilities allowing her to process dozens of data streams simultaneously. Industrial district teams have captured the chemical processing facilities, Tor reported from across the city.
"No more neural inhibitors will be produced. Civilian evacuation is proceeding ahead of schedule," Vera added. "The enhanced coordinators are able to direct population movements with unprecedented efficiency."
But, despite their tactical successes, time was running out. The planetary weapon would reach critical activation in less than 15 minutes, and none of their victories would matter if they could not shut down the device. Deep beneath the palace, Empress Valeria stood in the control chamber, her golden eyes reflecting the glow of the activation sequence that would destroy her entire world. Her divine sight showed her the chaos spreading across her empire, the liberation of minds she had worked for centuries to control, the collapse of the perfect order she had created. "Your Majesty," General Thane said desperately, "we could still negotiate with the rebels."
"Perhaps some accommodation."
"No," Valeria replied with finality. "I have seen the future that awaits if I allow this chaos to continue.
My people will abandon the harmony I have given them.
They will make their own choices, follow their own paths, create their own art and music and literature. They will become individuals instead of perfect citizens."
"Is that truly so terrible?" Valeria's laugh was filled with infinite sadness. "You do not understand, old friend.
I have carried the burden of divine sight for over 1,000 years. I have seen every possible future, every path that leads to happiness and every path that leads to suffering. The freedom they seek will bring them pain beyond imagination. But it will also bring them joy beyond imagination, said a voice from the chamber entrance.
Valeria spun around to see Marcus Chen standing in the doorway, the neural crown still gleaming on his head. His eyes had changed, they now held a reflection of the same divine fire that burned in her own. Impossible, she breathed. No human could survive the enhancement process. Maybe not, Marcus admitted, feeling his consciousness beginning to fray at the edges as his brain struggled with abilities it was never designed to handle. But, I can see what you see, Valeria. I can see all the possible futures. Then, you understand why this is necessary. No, Marcus said firmly. I understand why you think it is necessary. But, you have been looking at the future for so long that you have forgotten something important about the present. What? The journey matters more than the destination. Yes, freedom will bring pain and suffering. But it will also bring growth, discovery, love, art, music, and 1,000 other things that make existence meaningful. You have been so focused on preventing your people from making mistakes that you have prevented them from making anything at all. Valeria stared at him, her divine sight confirming everything he said. The futures where her people were free did indeed contain suffering. But they also contained wonders that she had never allowed herself to consider important. It is too late, she said finally. The activation sequence cannot be stopped. Even if I wanted to change my mind, the weapon will detonate in less than 10 minutes. Then, help me stop it manually. The request hung in the air between them like a challenge. Valeria's divine sight showed her the path Marcus was planning to take, the desperate journey to the planet's core, the precise timing required to trigger an electromagnetic pulse, the exact moment when the Federation ship would need to beam him to safety. It was possible. Barely possible, with odds so slim that they barely qualified as a chance at all. You will die, she said simply. Maybe. But, my sister's ship can transport me out at the last second. The timing has to be perfect, but, if it works, my people will be free to choose their own destiny. Marcus nodded. Isn't that what gods are supposed to want for their children? The chance to choose their own path? For a long moment, Valeria was silent, her divine sight showing her futures that branched and converged in infinite complexity. Finally, she moved to the control console and began entering a sequence of commands. The maintenance tunnel system extends directly to the weapons core, she said quietly. I am uploading the access codes to your neural interface. You will have exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds to reach the core chamber and trigger the electromagnetic pulse before the radiation becomes lethal. And the transport window? Your sister's ship will have a transport lock window of approximately 2 seconds. If she misses it, she won't miss it. Sarah never misses when it matters. Valeria looked at him with something that might have been admiration. Why are you doing this? You could escape with your sister and leave my people to their fate. Marcus's smile was sad but determined. Because a very wise Zephyrian librarian once told me that freedom is contagious. And because I learned something during my time here. What? Your people are not your children, Valeria. They are your equals. And equals deserve the chance to choose their own destiny, even if they choose wrong. As Marcus disappeared into the maintenance tunnel system, racing against time to prevent planetary annihilation, the revolution above ground reached its climax. The awakened Zephyrians, their abilities enhanced beyond anything their species had achieved in millennia, had secured every major population center on the planet. In orbit, the Hippocrates hung in position above the capital, its transport systems locked onto Marcus's neural signature as he descended into the planet's core. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, watching the countdown timer with growing desperation. Transport lock established, reported Ensign Park. But, the interference from the planetary weapon is making it difficult to maintain. Hold position, Sarah ordered. When I give the word, you beam him out instantly. No delays, no second chances. Deep in the planet's core, Marcus reached the weapon's fusion chamber just as the final activation sequence began. The chamber was a nightmare of barely contained nuclear fire, with radiation levels that would kill an unprotected human in seconds.
But the neural crown was providing more than just enhanced perception, it was somehow protecting him from the immediate effects of the radiation, buying him the precious minutes he needed to reach the control systems. The electromagnetic pulse generator was a simple device compared to the weapon itself, but triggering it required perfect timing. Too early, and the pulse would be absorbed by the weapon's shielding. Too late, and the fusion cascade would be irreversible. Marcus watched the energy readings climb toward critical levels, his enhanced sight showing him the exact moment when the pulse would have maximum effect. He could see the transport beam that his sister was preparing, the narrow window of opportunity when he could be safely extracted. Sarah, he transmitted through his neural interface. 15 seconds. Copy that, Marcus. Transport standing by. 10 seconds. Lock confirmed. 5 seconds. Marcus's hand hovered over the pulse generator, his divine sight showing him all the possible futures that hinged on this single moment. In some futures, he died and the planet was saved. In others, he lived but the weapon detonated anyway. In a precious few, everything worked perfectly. Now, he whispered, and triggered the electromagnetic pulse. The effect was instantaneous. The carefully controlled fusion reaction destabilized and collapsed, its energy dissipating harmlessly into space instead of tearing the planet apart. At the same instant, the transport beam from the Hippocrates locked onto his position and yanked him away from the core chamber. Marcus materialized on the bridge of his sister's ship just as the radiation from the collapsed weapon reached lethal levels. He was alive, the planet was safe, and the Zephyrian people were free to choose their own destiny for the first time in millennia. Status report, he gasped, pulling off the neural crown as his enhanced perception faded back to normal human levels. All systems nominal, Sarah replied, embracing her brother. The planetary weapon is completely neutralized. Orbital defenses have stood down. And we are receiving surrender signals from Imperial forces across the planet. On the surface, the revolution had achieved total victory. Empress Valeria, her divine sight now showing her futures of chaos and possibility in equal measure, formally abdicated her throne and announced the dissolution of the imperial government. In the palace archives, Lyra worked with awakened scholars to preserve the historical records while planning for a new form of government based on democratic principles and individual freedom. The transition would be difficult, but, for the first time in their history, the Zephyrian people would have the chance to determine their own fate. Dex and his team used the communications equipment to re-establish contact with the Galactic Federation, beginning negotiations for membership in the Democratic Alliance of Worlds that could offer guidance and support during the transition. And, throughout the planet, millions of Zephyrians experienced the strange and wonderful sensation of making their own choices for the first time. Some of those choices would lead to mistakes and suffering. But they would also lead to discoveries and achievements that their species had never imagined possible. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the renovated palace, which had been converted into a planetary council building where elected representatives from across the world gathered to debate and decide their civilization's future. The chaos that Valeria had predicted had indeed occurred, but it had been accompanied by an explosion of creativity, innovation, and growth that was transforming Zephyrian society. Artists were creating works of beauty that expressed individual vision rather than collective harmony. Scientists were making discoveries that had been impossible under the rigid imperial system. Even the ongoing project to restore sight to the Zephyrian population, using Federation medical technology, was proceeding faster than anyone had hoped. Any regrets? Sarah asked as she joined him at the window overlooking the bustling city below. Marcus thought about the question seriously. The transition had not been easy. There had been conflicts, disagreements, and mistakes that had cost lives. But there had also been marriages based on love rather than genetic compatibility, children who would grow up knowing they could choose their own paths, and a future full of infinite possibility. No regrets, he said finally. Freedom is messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But it is also the only thing that makes life worth living. Below them, the city that had once been a perfect symbol of order and control had become a chaotic symphony of individual voices all singing their own songs. It was noisy and unpredictable and wonderful. It was alive. And, somewhere in the archives, where she had chosen to spend her remaining years cataloging the true history of her people, Lyra smiled as she recorded the final entry in the story of the Zephyrian Revolution: "We were blind, and we learned to see. We were slaves, and we chose to be free. And we discovered that the most dangerous and beautiful thing in the universe is a mind that has learned to ask questions and refuse easy answers."
The human janitor had done the unthinkable. He had proven that even the most perfect prison could not contain the simple, irrepressible human belief that every thinking being deserved the right to choose their own destiny. And, in doing so, he had reminded the galaxy why humanity, for all its chaos and stubbornness and refusal to accept limitations, would always be worth fighting for.